Welcome to Design Minded, coming to you from 99.1 WQRT LPFM Indianapolis, a program that explores how design impacts our physical environment and quality of life, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. I'm your host, Lee Alig, an architect and developer with collaborator Steve Mannheimer, an artist and professor emeritus of informatics at Indiana University, Indianapolis. Today, we welcome Bill Brooks, the editor and publisher of Downtown's most comprehensive community newsletter, representing and delivered to 15 neighborhoods 11 months out of the year. The Urban Times is now 31 years in the making and ever more important. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thanks for having me.
Long overdue. I've been reading the Urban Times forever. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you into this world? I know you have a lot of past newspaper experience.
I do. I have actually, I got my first payment for a newspaper article 60 years ago when I wrote a sports column for the weekly newspaper in Benton County, Indiana, based in Fowler. I was a student at Otterburn High School, went to Ball State, studied journalism, worked at Crawfordsville, management positions at Crawfordsville, Plainfield, Mount Vernon in southwestern Indiana, and most recently Newcastle. My last paying job was Newcastle in 1993. Lived downtown ever since then and doing a variety of projects. Most recently, my life is dominated by Urban Times for the last 20 years. Usually I ran county seat daily or non-daily newspapers, which kind of allowed me to do my own publication because I was the publisher of two papers, in addition to being the editor, so I knew about circulation, I knew about advertising. I knew enough that I didn't want to do it all the time, which is why my son does that part of it. But so I've been a newsie for a long time.
Where are those county seat newspapers now?
Well, two of them are defunct, and Newcastle is still going. Not sure how going strong it is, but it's still going. Yeah, I managed to bury a couple of them, or at least they didn't get buried until long after I left, thank goodness. But
well, I think, as you told me earlier, when you came to town, you moved to Lockerbie, you connected with the Urban Times. I don't know, it was really just a Lockerbie newsletter at the time, right?
I was approached to do the Lockerbie letter in 96 when they needed an editor. And I was more comfortable with a newsprint publication. I knew it. I also knew it was cheaper to print, although we had to print more copies. But fortunately, there were 300 doors in Lockerbie at the time, and we printed 1,000 for about 4 or 5 months. The rest of them got gobbled up at O'Malley's. And then we printed 2,000, then we printed 3,000 and 4,000. And the Old North Side asked me to do their newsletter, and I did that for about 9 months. And then when Chatham Arch and St. Joe both needed a new editor, they approached me. But I knew there was no economy of scale printing 4 separate publications. So I closed down the 2 I was doing, told them, take it or leave it, you're now part of Urban Times, and they took it, fortunately. And then we grew from 4 neighborhoods to 15 eventually. And I always make the point that I've never recruited a neighborhood. I'm not Rupert Murdoch. I don't want to kick your longtime editor out to the curb and take it over, So besides that, I'm not that energetic anyway. So here we are.
Yeah. So what opportunity did you see? I mean, some people, but this is 94, right?
Right. Well, the first thing I did was I'm a news guy. And so I spot news where maybe the guy that was doing it or the neighbor down the street wouldn't spot news. And so I filled the Lockerbie letter with news, and that attracted advertisers. And so we went from 20 to 24 to 28 to 32 pages. And
so when you say you spotted news...
Well, I just recognize what's a news story and what isn't.
What people living downtown wanted to read about.
Right. And I'm pretty much I'm very egocentric, I think, but it's like, if I want to read it, I think you want to read it. And so you need, that's interesting. People like to read about other people.
But no crime stories.
No, not really. Well, partially because Now, we might have had a few crime trend stories over the years, but a monthly publication, just you can't print the,
Whose house got broken into?
right. And so it's way old news, and so we're more about what we think people need to know to have a nice life downtown.
To that extent, let me suggest that your readers are nascent, wannabe urban designers. They always want to know, well, what are people doing with the sidewalks? What are people doing with their garages? What are people doing with the alleyways?
Right.
What the things that an urban planner is going to be thinking about on a day-to-day basis am I right in that characterization?
I would think so. And part of it, now the demographic is changing quite a bit. I'm not sure I have as much of a handle on it as I did
Well, the
15 years ago.
population is virtually doubled, hasn't
Right.
it?
And there's, like the urban pioneers, we've called them, and the people that have been around for more than 5-10 years, they do have an expectation of managed growth and how we fix that and make sure that we preserve the historic nature. Because most of my neighborhoods, or more than half of my neighborhoods now, are still historic preservation districts. And many of the others are still conscious of their historic fabric. And so they want to protect that. So we play on that. If I had room and I had more energy, there are how many zoning boards there are. I don't try to manage all of them. That's all I can do to cover Historic Preservation Commission. And then the occasional story that pops up about a development on our fringe a little bit area.
Right.
But people are interested in knowing that. And a lot of people tell me that's the only place they can see it, mainly because they don't get the Indianapolis Business Journal, or they'd see more of them. But
even the IBJ, they'll get into the developer story, but they very rarely get into the the IHPC or the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission type of discussion, which is pretty relevant, I think, for people that live downtown.
Sure
anyway.
it is. Sure it is.
From an outside observer, maybe it's boring, but I don't know. I think it delivers for those of us downtown that are interested in what's going on. So you have the IHBC approval hearings, you have neighborhood identity news, I guess you could call it, stuff to do. And then commentary, your own commentary. You have Connie Ziegler writes a little historic thing.
Right. And, I felt like Connie's been on board, not exactly from the start. I've known Connie since before I'd started Urban Times. And, but it didn't take me long to figure we had the space, and the nature of our neighborhoods really called out for a history column. Plus, I'm a big history buff myself, and part of my pre-Urban Times life was producing a magazine for the old State Museum called Hoosierisms Quarterly that was basically founded by Ron Newland and myself to help start to create a statewide constituency to fund and build a new museum. So I've just soaked that up. I love that material. I know more than the average bear about what happened in Indiana over the years. And now, of course, through Urban Times and this other stuff, I know just enough to be dangerous about the history of Indianapolis.
Well, what were the drivers? When you moved downtown in 94, a lot of things had already happened. I think the mall was still under construction.
It started it was opened about a year after I came.
We had a convention center. We had
variety of things.
O'Malley's was open.
O'Malley's was open. Of course, that predates me quite a bit, and that was, I'm told,
86.
Very important to the livability of downtown. And I guess the city gave O'Malley some perks to get that done.
I was always told in the 80s, the two things that keep Indianapolis from accomplishing more in the eyes of those that are keeping score are school system that, actually serves downtown and a grocery store.
Right. And when I first moved downtown, most of the Lockerbie people, if they pretty much shuttled their own kids to school. There wasn't any school within walkable distance until they opened Center for Inquiry at School 2 in Chatham Arch, and then that changed. But and some very successful kids back then went to tech and were very successful. I think because they were inherently bright, and I think IPS at that time and maybe now does a really good job with their brightest kids, and not so much, if they have a problem, it's more with the kids that are the C, D students. I'll probably get backlash on saying that, but I think I
Oh,
think
yeah,
that
our mailbox will explode.
that's right. I'll try to do all I can to get your mailbox full.
Yeah.
Here, let me give you, let me give them your home address.
That's a moment in time. Population has grown quite a bit, but you say the demographics have changed. People that are making up most of downtown's population now are what? How are they different?
Well, I think a lot of them are 20, 30 somethings that want to live. Suddenly, I'm not enough of an expert on this to comment on why, but at some point there became a sea change, and these kids want to live downtown. They want to live within walking distance to a bevy of restaurants, and they want to.
Well, there's two factors that I've read about. I'm not an expert on these sorts of things, but yes, the kids, if they're locally born, they're not going to live up at 60th and Meridian Street. They can't afford to,
Right.
so they're going to live someplace, and they either live downtown where they can walk to a bar or a restaurant, as opposed to living in some apartment complex way the heck past, I don't know, Noblesville or
Right.
something.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are coming from across the state. And they grow up in Seymour, Indiana. They grow up in Shelbyville. There's nothing to do there.
Sure.
And so they say, well, Mom and Dad, I'm moving to the big city. Honey, can you come home for supper on Sunday once in a while?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I do a lot of work with Downtown Indy Inc. and tracking the demographics and how it grows and everything, and trying to develop the Downtown Indy DNA that they've created that tries to give a social and governmental conduit for people that don't live in neighborhood association territories. If you live in Lockerbie, you've got a Lockerbie Square Neighborhood Association that can lobby for you in certain cases.
Right.
But if you live in one of the condo buildings downtown, you don't. And so we've worked hard. It's a slow roll because there's not as much of a common denominator about porches and sidewalks to get these people involved in downtown, but keeping them informed of all the cool things that are going on, the festivals, but then also nightclub trouble on South Meridian Street. When you have an organization that can go to the city council or a committee that has a lot more clout than just you or me going.
Right.
I think it's a crucial point that you make, Bill, that it's for the people who aren't living in what increasingly are hundreds of thousands of dollars homes,
Right.
$5, $6, $7 million homes.
Right.
It's kids who live in condos. How do you design the socio-informational, experiential environment for these kids to feel a sense of place and sense of ownership without owning that $500,000 home?
Right. And, I guess the major impetus right now, and I'm not so much in the hard work of this, would be the internet and the websites and linking people together. It would have been much tougher if this had happened 40 years ago. You wouldn't have that. You just have maybe the local radio station
Right.
and some TV.
Well, there'd be flyers,
Right.
about the music scene and
Right.
stapled to telephone poles or something.
Sure. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Or plastered on the front of Urban Times newsstands. And
Yeah, right. There you go. You remember.
Do you have a sense of who your readers are? What percentage of them are under 40? What percentage of them make less than
I don't.
$100,000?
Just anecdotal, because we've researched doing demographics on that. The trouble is the demographic area is broad enough that it's not really representative of our neighborhoods. But I'm surprised because, I tell everybody, these kids, I'm trying to pioneer a whole new communications device called print media. But I can't believe how many 20, 30 somethings tell me, oh, I can't wait to read it every month, and I love to have it in my hands.
Oh my God.
Which
It's
is
a novel
it's not
experience.
enough of, to say that's a majority, but there's still enough of those people. And of course, all the neighborhood activists, the people that are all in on the neighborhoods, they read it. You mentioned before, and one of the things I've changed my mind about, or not changed my mind, but the opinion, we're the official neighborhood newsletter for 15 neighborhoods. And the internal communication is important. Like we've got a cleanup coming up next month, or we've got a barbecue, things like that. But most of these neighborhoods, their prime impetus in joining Urban Times is for external communication. They want
Explain that,
They
please.
want the world to know and want to move to Heron Morton Place. Also, we have people that say, I love reading what all the other neighborhoods are doing because we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we come across a problem. But I'll use an example. When Fletcher Place petitioned to join quite a while back, now one of their prime movers at that time was a realtor, and their gripe was that the major Indianapolis media thought they were Fountain Square. And 15 years ago, the home values in Fletcher Place were significantly higher than Fountain Square because the cultural trail hadn't happened yet. And as Linton Calvert of the Fountain Theater building told me one time, Fountain Square has been the next big thing for 30 years. And it really didn't happen until the cultural trail came
Yeah,
along.
what was the impact of the cultural trail?
Well, I think it had a huge impact on Fountain Square and Fletcher Place because they were further behind in the developmental process. Mass Ave, it's had an impact for sure, but Mass Ave was well along in the development.
It already had a critical mass.
It had that, and it had, we were beginning to fill in the parking lots and things like that. I worked very closely with the early Mass Ave efforts in the 90s and starting in the development of the cultural tourism initiative.
Right. Yeah.
The naming of the cultural districts and everything.
Right. You had
like
mass
that.
attractions.
Right. That predates me.
Yeah.
But later on, you had the Cultural Development Commission that was funded by the city and Lilly, and they developed 6 cultural districts.
Right.
And then we had to compete. We had to compete every year for here's our ideas for how to spend the money. And ours, a lot of it was public art, a lot of it was signage. Mass Ave's problem at the time was it's a totally linear district. And so you could come to the Chatterbox every night for 10 years and not realize that Theater on the Square was 2 blocks down the street, because you didn't go,
Right.
And when the East End was developed and Tom Batista started that project down there was nothing past college, not a thing in commerce. So we had to move people along. So we came up with kiosks and with brochures and everything.
Sculpture.
The sculpture was huge, but then early we got Wi-Fi one year, the external Wi-Fi along the avenue, so you could sit on the patio at the Chatterbox. And
does that still exist?
No, it's actually I think the infrastructure's still there. It's not that infrastructure. It's just the world is now wired. It's all penetrating our brain and scrambling our neurons.
Now it's broken past 10th Street all the way up to Factory Arts.
Right, and that's that's a big development.
Right.
Of course, Bottle Works is a huge development
and seemingly hugely successful still.
Yeah.
Sometimes you look at like what happened to Union Station, looked great for a couple of years, and then I guess then the mall came along and the mall sort of stole.
Celebration marketplaces.
Yes.
As they were called.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's close the street. Well, everybody will want to congregate in the street. Yeah, well, fortunately, that's not happening with Bottle Works. It seems to be holding its own, maybe because of the hotel and the office space.
The garage, the office space, they just last week or week before last announced that the first 2 phases are booked up in office space.
At the expense of downtown,
right, because Ernst & Young and
a bank.
And, what's one of the big law firms?
Ice
Miller's moving, but that's moving into a building that hasn't even been built yet, so that's a ways off.
And what's the disadvantage or the advantage of these changes?
Well, to the merchants, it's huge because you've got you've got more lunch crowd and dinner crowd. The one thing I would say is Bottle Works is in the Chatham Arch / Mass Ave Historic Preservation District. Chatham Arch was its own historic preservation district until 10 years ago, maybe or so, and it already had the 600 and 700 blocks of Mass Ave in it. But they wanted to protect the entire avenue, including the Coca-Cola facility.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to court a new historic preservation district. And IHP said, no, we're going to expand Chatham Arch into this one district. And that was fine.
Oh, is that not growth for downtown? Or are you thinking purely in terms of taking tenants out of the skyscrapers and putting them 6 blocks up the road on Massachusetts? What's the problem with that?
Economic development. I remember when I was in Newcastle, when the economic development director said, we're scoring these victories. You have to understand in this game, for every winner, there's a loser.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get a factory that Shelbyville wanted,
Sure.
then Shelbyville's the loser, and
They
you
got to
get
come
it.
from somewhere.
And so the circle is losing people because Bottle Works has created a critical mass of entertainment and
Food,
food and
shopping.
everything like that. And but they've done a really good job. Now I'm still wondering. There's a lot of storefronts along College in Phase 2 that are going to be wanting for occupants.
Right.
And with the current brick and mortar situation with shops, it's like that's going to be an interesting thing to see if there is able. Now they've filled the spots on Mass Ave and they've filled the spots in the inside Bottle Works in the hotel building, the old administration building,
The
with an
garage.
electric bike company and
right.
and a spa and a clothing company out of Detroit.
Right.
And so they've done a good job of filling those, but then they're creating more. And so all over downtown, you see street level storefronts that are vacant because too many people order on Amazon.
Well, all you have to do is go down Mass Avenue ends at New York Street.
Right.
You just go one block further south. You have Delaware Street, a lot of vacant storefronts.
Right.
Since the city-county building lost a lot of its courts.
Right.
And then the city market closed. And so
are they going to bring the city market back?
Well, they just announced they need a new partner for the for the Plaza project.
It's not good. It was supposed to reopen next year. Now it's going to be 2 more years.
2028, maybe.
Yeah, it's not good. Well, we don't know.
Well, the city market always thrived, in my experience anyway, always thrived on the traffic coming in and out of the city-county building.
Right.
And when you take that away...
But even then, they were basically a lunch counter.
Right.
I talked to 2 different city market managers over the years and talking about we've got to be more than just a lunch counter. You've got to have more than 11 to 1 window of opportunity to make any money. So that was always a tough nut to crack.
Well, converting what's called the gold building into apartments would help. Is that going forward?
It's still going forward, right?
Okay. So they're probably going to have to wait and see how that does. And it's going to be one of those things.
It's going to be a while. And then, of course, what they do to the city-county building still is up in the air. So,
but they've moved a lot of city.
Well, all the courts have gone out to the new
courts have.
Yeah.
But they put a lot of other agencies that have been pulled out back in there. But it's not the same kind of traffic that would demand a city market.
Right.
I mean, the courts.
You had a lot of people coming in.
People meeting their attorneys there.
Right.
A lot of attorneys eating sandwiches at those lunch counters.
Well, and the attorneys, some of them
and
anyway. The ones that are into
guys with guns.
The criminal attorneys really need to be out at the criminal justice center.
Yeah, now they do. Right. Yeah, they're all gone. That's the
bail bonds.
All right. So I touched on it just briefly. The jail was torn down, and it's going to be replaced with the WNBA facility.
Right. The all-purpose fever palace.
So some people would say it's arts versus sports. What really makes downtown work? And
well, wait a minute, back up. What arts downtown?
Well, okay.
Well, a few.
Sports has been downtown for a while.
Well, back when Mass Avenue was sort of a gallery district, Mark Rushman and others.
Right.
Scott Keller led the charge renovating buildings. It looked pretty good. Then there was, Dance Kaleidoscope was downtown, and
well, you can still go to the theater inside.
Idle Jorg, there are things happening.
Right.
But no new museums to be built. And it just seems like the growth is sports, and that's okay, but it's usually just sort of a part-time use.
Well, but I think the arts are doing a better than expected job of promoting themselves, and the Arts Council does a lot of good work with that. And yeah, it could be obviously more. I was just talking with Dance Kaleidoscope people last week. They're now in what we're calling the Factory Arts District building, which used to be Circle City Industrial Complex.
Right.
But their performances are all up, at the Toby. And
at the art museum.
Yeah, and they're not at IRT anymore. So that's another loss, kind of downtown scene of drawing people in. The issue is, the Colts draw 60,000 people at a time, but only 8 games a year, and the Pacers draw 18,000 people 40 times. The arts draw almost as many people, but it's every week, 10 here, 100 there, 200 there. And that's a lot of traffic. It's just not the big splash.
Believe me, I've listened to the discussion, the dialogue, the debate about, why are they funding sports when they really should be funding the arts? I think what you just said, Bill, is the arts are doing okay. They just don't have 60,000 people standing in line
Right.
to go to an art museum show.
There aren't many times the arts requires reserve deputies to control traffic on the street.
So is it really a contest, or are they not somehow reciprocal?
Actually, I asked Kim Goodfriend, the relatively new Dance Kaleidoscope director, last week, and I said, is it a battle between? And she said, we actually get a lot of cooperation from the sports. And so they're, obviously they're not giving them $1 million a year or anything, but they're supportive. They do what they can. They provide venues or publicity or whatever when they can. So it's not as us versus them as you might think it is. But again, the city hasn't built any any venues for Dance Kaleidoscope to dance in like they did the Colts.
But things like the Fringe Theater have found a way, they've sort of wedged their way into a bunch of historic buildings. And of course, Dave Anderchek and Chatterbox will be there forever, hopefully.
Well,
I wouldn't, as much as I love Dave, that's not an arts landmark.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, but it's a nightclub.
Right. Yeah. Well, and by day it's a dive bar, which is why I hung out there. But,
well, it's a dive bar at night too, even if they have somebody playing the saxophone.
Jazz, right? Yeah.
I think in my mind, the framing the debate about aesthetics versus athletics, as somebody said once.
Yeah.
I don't buy it as much as I might have 30 years ago.
Right.
I think that it is nowadays when we're treating downtown as a place to potentially live, and certainly a place that you drive in from some other part of town. You say, I'm going to come down for a sports event. It's easy. I liked it. It was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't I come back for Dance Kaleidoscope or something at the IRT or something at the Fringe Theater?
Right.
I don't see them competing with each other unless you're thinking, well, the city ought to pay more money. The state ought to pay more money to the arts organizations to support them. I'm not going to argue that.
I think that's the perception, is that the sports get more public money than the arts do. But whether that's even true or not, I don't know. Now, let's say pre-Trump. The grants that all these arts organizations together get might add up to as much money, but certainly you're right, they don't get any theaters built for them.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up about the change in the political climate and how, let's say, my friends at the Indiana Humanities, they're suffering. WFYI is going to suffer lack of funding.
Sure.
How is that, if in any way, and you're the expert here, how is that going to impact neighborhood living downtown, the people that buy your get your newspaper for free, I should say?
That's right. Yeah, if they bought it, they'd be cheated. But, I think... obviously, if you lose an arts organization, it's going to take away the perks that you have for downtown living. I love to live downtown because I like the vibrancy, but I also like being able to walk to different venues, or the others are a very short drive that you don't have to invest a lot of time to get there. So it would hurt. I know my good friend Shannon Forsell was really scrambling at the Cabaret for some loss of federal funding. And the hope is, and I think this happens sometimes, is when you have these big hits, it spurs local contributions. I remember years ago in Newcastle, the publisher was very much against Planned Parenthood, and he leveraged the United Way to remove Planned Parenthood from their roster. And at least for the next 3 years when I was in Newcastle, Planned Parenthood's donations skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
More than made up for the United Way money, because the people went, the people that supported go, we better. Now, whether they took their United Way money and gave it directly to Planned Parenthood or they actually donated additionally, I don't know. But sometimes there's an effect of, we need your help, we need it today. I've seen things online about Ken Burns calling out for PBS. It's time to step up.
Right.
Is there any kind of, when you talk about the Chatterbox as a kind of a neighborhood bar with music, are there other institutions that operate on that scale in other neighborhoods in the metro area that you cover?
Yeah, Fountain Square's got many places, like the White Rabbit Cabaret that people seem to love. And, of course, Radio's been there forever, and Tufte's places and things. But
the swing dance on twice a month.
Right. And so, and the Athenaeum has some things that go on in there. But and once you get into the neighborhoods, it's like I think there are some bars, obviously, like in Cottage Home, you have the I think
Dorman
of the Hog.
Street?
Dorman Street. All I can remember is the old name, the Hog, but
yeah, right.
And over a little bit farther east, you got the TikTok Lounge and cozy little places like that have a loyal following. And
sure. Well, and like I mentioned a minute ago, there are the coffee shops too, and then some of the.
Yeah, it's funny about that. Of course, when I moved downtown, there was the Abbey, where 45 Degrees is now in the old Hague drugstore building that's gone. But and then there was Cath in City Market. And I remember the argument, Starbucks is going to come in and they're going to ruin everything. And rightly or wrongly, the people promoting Starbucks said, but they will enhance the coffee culture and promote others. And whether that actually is how it happened, it has happened. There's maybe a glut of coffee houses, maybe, but there's certainly plenty to choose from.
Well, and we've got, 6, 7 independent bookstores that we didn't have 15 years ago.
Right. That's kind of if you wait long enough, the pendulum will swing back.
And to what extent do the neighborhoods that your publication services or complements, to what extent are people thinking about, we need a bookstore in Chatham Arch. We need a...
You hear a little bit of that, but of course Chatham Arch is a bad example because they're so close to everything else. But,
well, pick another one.
Yeah, but like, you get Meridian Park, let's say, for example, that's my far north neighborhood, and it's kind of between 29th and 34th Street, just between Pennsylvania and Washington Boulevard, maybe somewhere around there. It's anchored, the corner of it is Children's Museum and Shortridge High School is on the north end.
So south from
there's not a lot of commerce in historic Meridian Park proper.
Is that because of zoning prohibitions?
A little bit. I think that's, it's the city pretty much tried to get those oasis neighborhood things out. There's a couple of health clinics up there, and of course Tabernacle is up there.
Well, if you get over to College, there are shuttered retail establishments.
But they, I'm sure they would like a local coffee house.
Right.
But it's kind of like they're hamstrung by. And the other part about it is, it's like, okay, you open a coffee house and you expect, it's like several coffee houses have opened in the first floor of high-rise apartments, depending on that clientele, and it doesn't happen. Those people go where they're comfortable, where they're already fans of, or they just don't drink coffee or tea. They're not coffee house people. The cool people like us, we're coffee house people.
Well,
but the other people they're just not.
Yeah,
I think it's
just laptop people.
When you think of the health of our neighborhoods, we think about stuff like what makes this neighborhood livable. As Lee mentioned earlier, you say, well, in the beginning, we were just trying to get people to live downtown. You needed a grocery store and you needed a good education system. I've also heard in that same breath, we need a hardware store.
Right.
Somebody go get a screwdriver at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But when you think about what really makes a neighborhood livable, can you walk to a place to get a cup of coffee? Can you walk to an entertainment venue that's not? It's not the IRT.
Right.
It's stand-up comedy on the corner, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Is there? I don't know what to call it. We used to talk about the cappuccino economy, but that was too much emphasis on frothy coffee drinks.
Right.
But is there a culturati economy, if you will?
I think so. I think that I think we talk about all the people that moved downtown in the last 10 years, and they seem to can't build apartments fast enough.
Right.
People
want a walkable,
and they want a walkable thing, but they also want someplace to walk to.
Right.
And so you have this critical mass of people that in turn support the brick and mortar places. The downtown restaurants took a huge hit between George Floyd and COVID and outsource work at home. So suddenly there were no customers. Maybe there were 10 people eating lunch in your place where there used to be 60.
But one thing you'll notice, and this, I have to give the city credit for this, took them a while to maybe see it, but the earlier apartment complexes generally didn't have any retail.
Right.
They just put units right on the ground floor.
Right.
And then as time's gone on, they've mandated ground floor retail,
right.
even if the developer can't lease it. you got to put it in because it's coming.
Right.
You
And
know,
this, and
it may take 5 years, but
and the other part about that is I've always understood, okay, and depending on the location, who's going to live on that ground floor apartment,
people with dogs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
really?
but they,
Well,
if you're in the heart of downtown, I'm
yeah.
not sure that that's a very attractive option to be.
That's where you need a bookstore.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hate online shopping so much, partially because a lot of my advertisers depend on it not happening, but also just the idea that if this trend continues in 30 years, there aren't going to be any stores. There's only going to
Right.
be delivery drivers.
And that'll be universal. I mean, it won't be Indianapolis's
Right,
problem.
sure.
It'll be everybody's
Right.
problem.
But
Well, if you could design an ideal, a utopian neighborhood,
Lockerbie Square.
Yeah.
what factors would it have? What density of population? What mix of old and young, other demographic mixes?
All of that true. Yes. Yeah. You have to. Yeah. You certainly have to have a mix of old and young, or else everybody dies at the same time, and then you have empty condos, but or townhomes. And I think you have to have at least a majority of homeowners. We've been actually renters for the last 5 or 6 years. But we're wonderful, responsible people and
That's
still
true.
involved. But
You have that
but
reputation.
we had.
That's what I was told.
But we were property owners downtown for
Yeah.
for many years, and if you have a vast majority of renters, you lose some of that buy-in, that civic activity, because they don't have any horse in the race. But yeah, and you have to have amenities, you have to have shops, you have to have stores, coffee houses, bars. In the internet craze, it's like no wonder to me that people open bars. Sometimes I'm worried about Mass Ave becoming too much Broad Ripple
Right.
because there are too many bars. But we also understand that you can buy your shoes online, you can buy your books online, you cannot drink with your buddies online. And so,
They haven't figured
and
it
so
out.
the bars still survive. And coffee houses, I think, are the same way. Is that people, especially people that work at home, the kids that come to the Red Door Cafe where I live and breathe, is we're so tired of working by ourselves at home, so we have to come where there's noise, where there's other people. Even if we don't talk to them, we have a comfort in the fact that we're
Your-
sitting here with other living and breathing.
Your friend's bar.
So that all happens, I think, and to put that together is tough. I think I often think about, and I don't want to sound like an apologist for city officials, but it's like you have 18 different factors. Who's in charge of making sure those all don't step on each other's toes? Who's in charge of, they put in a fancy sidewalk painting on Mass Ave when we were trying to create the cultural district thing. And then 3 days later, the Department of Public Works comes in and tears it up to repair the leaky line underneath. Somebody should have waited 2 weeks to paint the painting.
Cities are complex.
And I often thought about that with, I was privy to the construction of the new State Museum back in the day because I was producing that magazine. And I'm standing there, and this is a huge project. And it occurred to me, there's somebody here who knows that the I-beams are going to come in tomorrow and the bricks are going to come in 3 days from now.
It was Susan Williams, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it was Susan. Susan knows everything. So, but anyway, it's like somebody knows that stuff, and that's kind of the way I think the city, is like. Sometimes they step on each other's toes, and maybe that's understandable. Maybe it isn't.
You have a great sense of confidence in how our elected officials and their appointed underlings, how efficiently they operate.
Well, I think, that's, every once in a while, even a broken egg turns into a good omelet.
Well said. Well, do you have, are there other sorts of cultural resources? I mean, one thinks, it used to be back in the day that neighborhoods were defined by the church at the center of that neighborhood. And in many cases, there was an ethnic cohesion because everybody within shot of, a golf ball, was an Italian, was Irish, was German or something. That doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. Same thing with schools. Is that, of course, I grew up in a rural environment in Northwest Indiana where the school was everything, and, there was even our little town of 900 people, there were like 8 churches, but there was only one school, and everybody went to it.
So in the absence of those sorts of cultural landmarks, those sorts of cultural magnets, if you will, what does a neighborhood need to thrive?
That's a good question, to create those common spaces, like those third spaces that we've talked about, now.
Are there some neighborhoods that do a better job of, having Sunday brunch with the neighbors? Or
I think there are. Lockerbie has several things. Chatham Arch has 2 or 3 things. They have a wine group that meets every month and draws anywhere between 20 and 40 people, sometimes.
Well, and the Harrison Center promotes
And the Harrison Centers are
front
great,
porch.
and the front porch parties, and Joanna Taft has done an amazing job there. It used to be called the Harrison Center for the Arts, and it still is, and they have several galleries in the building and a lot of artist studios in the building. But they dropped for the arts because they do as much community building as they do arts work, and they're just now in September or in August, I forget what month it is.
August 27th.
They're doing that, the Polk building, which is a result of, at least partially a result of their pre-enact Indy projects of 2017 to 2019, where they took over 16th Street and tried to create a neighborhood as it was, not yuppified. They work a lot at that, and hats off to them for doing that.
Point well taken. So other organizations like the Harrison Center, if we could clone 3 or 4 of them and drop one down in Fountain Square and drop one down, you tell me where.
Right. Well, I don't, organizations like that. I don't know anybody else that does the outreach that Joanna does. Their First Fridays are, there's always a whimsical element in there that Kyle Wright is probably the chief whimsy, or chief of
several.
whimsy. But but the merry band of wackos, and
Kip Norman is in there too.
Kip, and but at Fountain Square, I'm not seeing the Fountain Square Neighborhood Association. They're one of the most recent members of the Urban Times family, and they're very active. And they pulled off that tactical urbanism project over on Calvary Street.
Explain that a little bit to our listeners, please.
Well, the tactical urbanism is trying to improve life. I'm probably phrasing this wrong, but trying to do things to improve life in urban settings. And over in Fountain Square, you had that big arching road before you get to Virginia Avenue that comes over from Calvary Church over there, and
it's been closed.
It was a very difficult maneuver for pedestrians.
It's hard to figure out how to get there from here.
Pedestrians and bicyclists. It was dangerous, and so they created paint bollards to create a safe passageway without a lot of money. And then Chatham Arch is taking up that same initiative to try to improve life along 10th Street through Chatham Arch, where it's very hard, especially for somebody that maybe doesn't move as fast as they used to get across 10th Street.
Right.
You shorten the intersection. They did that on 16th Street 15 years ago, the Tinker Street redevelopment project, where they put bump outs. The intersection of 16th there at the Harrison Center and the Joy of All Sorrows Church is much smaller than it used to be. There's bump outs, and the kids the kids from Heron High School don't have to risk their lives crossing the street anymore. The other thing about our neighborhoods is the ones that were not as far along. I worry about Lockerbie in that. And we have a lot of younger people, newcomers, who are very active. I don't want to say they're not. When you had the old days and you were teetering on the brink of becoming a slum again, people were active. And then people move in and see it really nice and pristine. They tend to think it was always that way, and it doesn't require constant work. Whereas Cottage Home, for example, of course, they were in the floodplain, and so they had a lot of problems over there.
Right.
They were able, because of that, for their neighborhood association to buy up tracts of land, and they've used those very productively for their green space areas and things like that. But they hunkered down. When the project came along, it was like, let's get to it. Let's get 50 people out there and move that building. When Woodruff Place was absorbed by the city back in the 60s, maybe.
Yes.
The city supported the town hall, the esplanades, the fountains, and the historic lights. one by one, the city abdicated that. So the neighborhood, the Civic League and the Woodruff Place Foundation, now they have to maintain all of that. And they've rebuilt the fountains. They've raised money to totally rebuild fountains. They're responsible for mowing the esplanades. They're responsible for keeping the town hall from falling down and the walls. And they've done it. And that sense of purpose, I think, has kept Woodruff Place more vibrant in civic involvement than maybe a neighborhood that seems less threatened.
Well, as you know, there's a new taxing district for the downtown,
Yes,
mile square approximately.
right.
And that's to include a lot of security, maintenance,
Right.
landscaping, a lot of things. I don't know that it's altogether obvious yet, but it has a lot of potential. And I would just imagine you and Urban Times sort of embracing maybe a bigger picture, maybe 15 neighborhoods is only part of what you ultimately do. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, but
This guy's getting ready to retire in a couple of years.
no, but I just wonder if some of these new initiatives that you've reported on and all have made a difference in the way you see the next 20, 30 years for Urban Times.
Oh, I definitely. Well, I don't know about Urban Times. I try not to think beyond next month. Tell you the truth. And you didn't ask me earlier, but it's like somebody asked me what a great idea you had creating Urban Times. Well, I kind of didn't. The neighborhoods kind of forced it on me,
Right.
and I stumbled into a niche that was kind of immune to the fate of print publications.
Good point.
I think there's if I remember right, many meetings on that economic improvement district I took part in. We were, I think, the largest municipality in the country without an EID and
Without a what?
without a downtown taxing district, where it's a voluntary, basically surtax. You tax yourself.
Right.
It's like a 1/10% on your property taxes or whatever. I'm making that up, but it's for some people, it's a large amount of money. Some of these high-rise buildings, it is. But
Right. A lot of
now they exempted residential from it. General Assembly did. But we still had a decent budget to work with to improve safety. A lot of it's going to go to homelessness problems.
The unsheltered.
The unsheltered, right. And but I think that's a good sign because we've it's kind of like somebody said a long time ago about, maybe this was an anti-war person, but it's like, why doesn't the Pentagon have to have bake sales? Why does my project have to have a bake sale? And
well, that brings people together.
Downtown Indy doesn't have to have a bake sale anymore to keep these projects going.
Well, but what you just said about Woodruff Place, because the city initially funded some of these civic design improvements, but then gradually withdrew their support, forcing the neighborhood to say, well, we're going to pick up the slack here. That actually has turned out to be a wise decision, as it were, on the part of the city, because now these people have skin in the game.
Right. I'm not sure that's why the city did it, but
no.
I think the net result is you're right. It's like these people have more buy-in, more cause to work, but I'm sure it's never-ending battle and never-ending headache for how are we going to pay for this and that.
Right.
We've been talking for almost an hour. What's the future? Where's the future going for Urban Times and for you, Bill Brooks?
Well, I don't know. I joke that my exit strategy is keeling over at the keyboard. But problem is, and I'm going to sound very arrogant now, but I've been doing this for 60 years, and I've run real newspapers, and I've got a lot of experience that isn't that easy to come by. So finding somebody to do that in my stead is not easy, I don't think. So anyway,
and priorities may be different.
Right. So, it'll continue. It might not continue exactly. It probably ought not to continue in exactly the same way. When I took over the newsrooms or the papers in 3 cities, the one thing I hated hearing somebody say in the newsroom was, well, that's how we've always done it. I'd say, well, that's pretty much a good reason to change, or at least to study. And let's not make change for change's sake, but let's not keep doing what we're doing just because that's always the way we've done it.
You are an institution, Bill. It's safe to say that. And Urban Times is also an institution of a different order, but one exists through the other.
It's been a pleasure to get to talk to you more about all this. We'll keep looking for Urban Times on the newsstand.
Chances are it'll keep appearing.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
Thank
you, gentlemen. I appreciate it very much.
If you have suggestions or comments about this episode, contact us at talkdesignminded@gmail.com.